Imagine a cold evening at the edge of winter. Outside, the wind moves through bare branches, and the streets are slowly sinking into darkness. Inside, there's a soft, warm light, a comfortable chair, and the quiet crackle of a fireplace. It's that time of year when shop windows turn into little stages with garlands, snowflakes, toy trains, and almost always somewhere in the center there's a smiling old man in a red suit. If I ask you to picture Santa Claus, you'll probably see the same character that millions of other people do. A kind, slightly plump grandfather with a white beard, wearing a bright red coat with white fur trim, a wide black belt, heavy boots, and a gentle, slightly tired smile. And almost automatically, next to that image, another red shape appears in your mind, a glass bottle or a shiny can of cola. For many of us, these two pictures have grown together so tightly that it's hard to separate them. Santa and that red drink stand side by side in the same December snow. And that leads to a very modern, slightly awkward question. Did a soft drink company really create our modern image of Santa Claus just to sell more soda at Christmas? Let's stay here by this imaginary fireplace and try to untangle that story. Because the simple slogan, "Coke invented Santa," isn't true. But the real story of how advertising and old legends got woven together is much more surprising. Long before the first factory filled a bottle of soda, there was a man known as Saint Nicholas of Myra, a bishop in the 4th century. People remembered him as someone who helped those in need and cared especially about children and sailors. Over time, many gentle stories formed around his name, about how he left gifts in secret, came to the rescue at difficult moments, and appeared just when people had almost lost hope. Across the centuries, these stories spread through Europe and began to change. In the Netherlands, he became Sinterklaas, arriving by ship from warmer countries and bringing children sweets and small presents. In England, there was Father Christmas, a kindly figure who carried with him a feeling of celebration, warmth, and a well-fed table. In other countries, different winter characters appeared, some more serious, some more cheerful, but in almost all of them, you can find echoes of those early tales about St. Nicholas. In old icons and frescoes, Nicholas often looks very serious. He isn't a smiling character from a greeting card, but a strict saint people turn to with prayers and hopes. The cozy storybook Grandfather by the Fireplace is a much later, softer version that appeared when winter tales began to focus more and more on children and the family circle. When European settlers sailed across the ocean to North America, they took these winter traditions with them. In the New World, church saints, folk characters, and children's stories slowly intertwined. Names were simplified, costumes changed, and over time, Sinterklaas in Dutch-speaking communities turned into the familiar English name Santa Claus. But this early Santa still didn't look like the jolly figure in a red suit we know today. His image was still in progress, like a sketch an artist has only just started. In the 19th century, Christmas in the United States began to change as well. It moved away from noisy street celebrations and turned into a quieter, home-centered holiday, with children, presents, and a warm fireplace at the heart of it. In 1823, a poem appeared in a New York newspaper called A Visit from St. Nicholas, which later became famous as "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." Today, it is usually attributed to Clement Clarke Moore. This poem gently but firmly added new details to Santa's story. In its lines, Santa arrives in a sleigh pulled by 8 reindeer, each with a name. The sleigh lands softly on the roof, and his path into the house is not through the door, but down the chimney. He doesn't seem like a towering giant, but rather a small, quick, almost elf-like figure, who slips into the house with a quiet laugh while everyone is asleep. Later, in the second half of the 19th century, an American cartoonist named Thomas Nast began to draw Santa regularly for the magazine Harper's Weekly. For almost 20 years, Nast kept returning to this character. Under his pen, Santa slowly moved to the North Pole, above all countries, gained a workshop with helper elves and long lists of children. In some drawings he looks quite large and solid, in others smaller and rounder. Sometimes his clothes are dark, sometimes almost light. It feels as if Nast is constantly trying different roles and moods on Santa, searching for the one version that will make this winter visitor feel truly alive. By the early 20th century, Santa had acquired a small but clear biography. People were already used to thinking of him as a resident of the North Pole, working in his workshop all year, keeping track of children's names, and on Christmas Eve, harnessing his reindeer to deliver gifts. But there still wasn't a single, final, agreed-upon face. The Santa in a storybook and the Santa on a postcard could look quite different from each other. Meanwhile, in the background, another story was unfolding, the story of a fizzy drink born at a pharmacy counter. In the late 19th century, Coca Cola was first sold as a kind of tonic at soda fountains, and only later turned into a mass-market refreshment. By the early 20th century, its image was clear. It was a way to cool down in hot weather, a refreshing drink for warm days. The advertisement showed summer, bright sun, and people escaping the heat. In summer, that worked perfectly. But in December, when people warmed their hands on cups of tea and coffee, the picture changed. A cold soda in a snowy landscape looked out of place, and sales naturally dropped. For the company, this wasn't some abstract theory. It was a very practical problem. Winter was hurting the business. Marketers began looking for a way to convince people that this drink wasn't only for July, but for January too. Slogans appeared like "Thirst knows no season," hinting that you could drink cola at any time of year. But words alone weren't enough. The idea needed an image that people would accept with their hearts. In the 1920s, the brand started carefully placing its drink into winter scenes. Snow outside the window, decorated Christmas trees, family evenings. In some of these pictures, Santa appeared, borrowed from familiar illustrations. But from artist to artist he changed, sometimes a bit stiff, sometimes too thin, sometimes surprisingly serious. It was clear the company still hadn't found that one Santa who would remind people of a fairy tale and yet not feel out of place in a real home. The turning point came in 1931 when the company invited an artist named Haddon Sundblom to create a new Christmas campaign built around Santa Claus. Sundblom went back to "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" and studied the lines that described Santa as chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf. He wanted a Santa who would look warm, understandable, and genuinely human. Someone you could easily imagine standing in your own living room. To achieve that, Sundblom used real people as models. For many years, his main Santa was a friend and neighbor, a former salesman named Lou Prentice. Later, after Prentice passed away, Sundblom, according to accounts, used his own face as reference, painting Santa while looking at himself in a mirror. Because of this approach, the Santa in his paintings doesn't look like a generic symbol. He looks like a real person, with small lines of expression around his eyes, a soft, slightly tired but kind gaze, and natural, lifelike movements. In these paintings, Santa no longer seems like a little elf. He is an adult, solid man in a bright red suit with white fur trim. He wears a wide black belt, sturdy boots. His face is a little flushed from the cold, and his smile is so warm that you almost want to smile back. In Sundblom's scenes, he isn't only flying through the sky in a sleigh. He's checking lists, talking to children, sitting down to rest in the kitchen, and in between, reaching for a bottle of the drink he's quietly advertising. There's a small, curious detail. For a while, Sundblom painted Santa with a pipe, in the spirit of older traditions and those early poems. Later, as attitudes toward smoking changed and Santa became more and more closely associated with children, the pipe quietly disappeared from many illustrations. A single successful painting on its own doesn't change a culture. What matters is what happened next. Year after year, for decades, the company kept coming back to Sundblom's Santa. Sometimes the pose changed, sometimes the background shifted. One year a living room, another a workshop, another a children's bedroom. But the face, the costume, and the general mood stayed the same. These images appeared on shop posters, in magazines, on calendars, and in all sorts of promotional materials. Every December, year after year, people saw the same smiling Santa again and again. Children grew up, and this character remained part of the winter scenery, like snow and twinkling lights. Over time, our brains did what they always do. They simplified. Faced with a dozen different historical Santas from old books, and one very consistent Santa on every window and advertisement, the mind chose the simpler answer. When someone said Santa Claus, most people pictured Sundblom's version. Other versions, with green robes, brown coats, or more serious faces, didn't disappear completely, but they became rare guests. The cheerful red Santa with the open smile quietly won the competition for attention. As the drink spread to other countries, this Santa traveled with it. In different parts of the world, the same red suit and the same kind face started appearing every winter. And at some point, he began to feel traditional, even though, in truth, he was a fairly recent arrival. There's even a small secret hidden in some of the old artwork. In a few early pieces, Sundblom slipped in little playful details. For example, his own signature disguised as part of a toy or a label. Tiny reminders that behind this timeless image stood a very specific artist, working in a very specific era of advertising. At this point, we can finally address one of the most persistent myths. Before Coca Cola, Santa was green, and then they painted him red. It's a neat story, but reality is more complicated. Long before Sundblom, artists had already drawn Santa, Father Christmas, and similar figures in many colors: green, brown, blue, and, of course, red. Thomas Nast himself sometimes put Santa in a dark red outfit. In Victorian England, Father Christmas was often shown in green robes, connected more with nature and midwinter than with presents. What happened in the 20th century wasn't a sudden painting over of a universally green Santa into red. It was a slow pushing out of the alternatives. The red Santa started appearing so often and in so many places that the other colors were simply washed out of everyday use. When people threw away old cards and decorations, the new ones they bought were more and more likely to show a red-suited Santa. The brand also had very practical reasons to commit to red. It was already the color of its logo, it printed well, and it looked striking against snow and dark winter skies. But if we simply say Coke made Santa red, we miss the more interesting part. Red wasn't invented from nothing. It was strengthened and standardized until it felt like the only natural choice. If we go back to that original problem, weak winter sales, the logic becomes clearer. In Sundblom's paintings, Santa is often indoors, in warm, familiar spaces, a living room, a kitchen, a cozy corner, after a long night's work. The cold, snowy world is kept outside the window. Inside, the drink on the table looks like just another part of the setting, like cookies or a glass of milk. The visual message is simple. This is no longer just a way to cool down in the heat. It's something you can drink in comfort, even in winter. The drink slowly moves from the world of thirst and heat into the world of ritual and occasion. Later, television gave this idea movement and sound. Holiday commercials with music, lights, and that same red-suited Santa turned the drink into one of the unofficial signals of the season. In some countries, people still joke that Christmas begins when that commercial comes on. In many markets, especially in the second half of the 20th century, local artists created their own versions of the Red Santa for the brand, with slightly different faces, figures, and backgrounds. But as long as the red suit, white trim, and warm mood remained, viewers read them as the same character. Sometimes people say that Coca Cola invented Santa Claus. That isn't true. Behind Santa stands Saint Nicholas, European winter figures, poets, and 19th century illustrators. By the time soda appeared, Santa already had reindeer, a chimney, and a workshop. Another popular phrase is that before Coca Cola, Santa was always green. History shows a very different picture. On old cards and drawings, he appears in green, brown, red, and more. It's just that in the 20th century, the red version was shown more often than the others. And finally, some say that this drink was always a Christmas tradition. In reality, it started out as a summer refreshment and only gradually moved into the winter season thanks to advertising choices. Over time, those choices gathered habits around them and began to feel like a real tradition. If so much of this connection between Santa and soda came from marketing, why does it still feel so natural, almost homely, especially for those of us who grew up surrounded by these winter images? Part of the answer lies in how our childhood memories are built. Winters in memory often look like a repeating pattern. The same melodies on the radio, the same favorite films, the same box of ornaments taken down from the same shelf, the same smell of tangerines and pine. Into that familiar set of details, advertising images quietly slip. The same red suit, the same truck with lights, the same bottle on the festive table. Over time, they stop feeling like ads and start to feel like just another piece of the winter background. When a certain combination of pictures and sounds appears every year at the same time, it fuses into a single image of the holidays. As we grow up, we don't always remember where each element came from, but the feeling remains. This is how it's supposed to be. If you take away one piece, a melody, a decoration, or a familiar red silhouette, the celebration suddenly seems a little emptier, even though we know rationally that nothing essential has changed. That doesn't mean our traditions are fake, or that it's wrong to enjoy them. It's more of a gentle reminder. Even the warmest habits started somewhere, sometimes in a family living room, sometimes on the pages of a book. and sometimes in a meeting room where someone was sketching out a new ad. And once we know that, we can more consciously choose which details really matter to our own families and which ones we're happy to let go. So, did the company create Santa Claus in order to make its drink the #1 choice at Christmas? If we put emotions aside and look at the facts, the answer sounds like this. No, the company did not invent the character of Santa. He grew out of the image of Saint Nicholas and many folk traditions over centuries. But it did do a great deal to shape the modern visual Santa, his face, his height, his colors, his mood, and to place that particular version next to its product again and again. In that sense, the brand didn't create the very idea of Santa, but it did play a big part in creating the Santa that most of us picture today, and in tying that image very tightly to its own logo. Let me bring us back one last time to our fireplace. The fire is crackling, it's dark outside, and the story of Santa now looks less like a single myth and more like a long journey through time. Long ago, there was a real person named Nicholas, remembered as a kind and fair bishop. Around him, over time, legends grew. Those legends turned into winter tales, and in those tales appeared a mysterious night visitor who left gifts behind. Then poets and artists stepped in. They gave him reindeer, a chimney, a workshop at the far north, and a way to circle the whole world in a single night. And in the 20th century, advertising artists added their touches, drawing Santa as we're used to seeing him now, and placing this red-coated guest in shop windows all around the globe. The next time you're walking down a winter street and see Santa smiling from a store window in his red coat, you might pause for just a moment and quietly ask yourself, which parts of that image came from old stories and family traditions, and which parts appeared because someone somewhere once looked for a successful idea for a winter ad, and which of those pieces matter most to you personally? Santa did not begin as a piece of advertising or as a logo. In the earliest tales, he was more of a reminder that there is room in the world for unexpected help, kindness, and quiet generosity. Over time, new layers were added, cultural, family, and yes, commercial. But it's up to us to decide what we lean on when we decorate our homes and tell our children their winter stories. Perhaps the real value of stories like this is that they help us understand our own holidays a little better. Some details we keep simply because they make us happy. Others we treasure because there's a long history behind them. And some we hold on to because they were lovingly invented by the people closest to us. Everything else can be treated as background, like the lights in a shop window that we can enjoy, but also walk calmly past on our way to what truly matters. Thank you for spending this evening by the fire and listening to this story to the end. There are many other tales waiting about how the things and traditions we know so well were born, changed, and became what they are today. And who knows, maybe some of them will one day become part of someone else's warm family evening, too.